The future is not a distant horizon waiting to be discovered. It is being carved in this very moment silently, relentlessly through the minds of the young. Every child carries within them the seeds of tomorrow, what they learn, what they absorb, and what they are led to believe will one day dictate the direction of entire societies. Yet how often is this truth ignored? How often do we, as a world, forget that education is not merely about books and classrooms, but about shaping destiny? When we turn away, when we become passive, we leave the shape into forces that may not have the best interest of truth, justice, or freedom at heart. Consider this: a child does not enter the world with fixed beliefs, rigid ideologies, or unquestionable certainties. They arrive with openness, curiosity, and unshakable hunger to understand. That hunger is sacred. It is the purest form of possibility. But possibility is fragile. It can be nurtured into brilliance, or it can be suffocated into conformity. And the choice between the two is not accidental. It is determined by the systems, the ideologies, and the hands that guide that child. Whoever holds influence over education holds influence over generations. Whoever molds the ideology of children molds the future of civilization itself. Education, ideology, and children. These three forces are not separate. They are woven into one thread. Break one strand and the fabric of society unravels. Strengthen the thread and the future becomes unbreakable. Yet here lies the danger: power is never neutral. Systems of education are often built not only to teach, but to control, not only to expand knowledge, but to limit imagination. Ideologies seep into lessons, sometimes quietly, sometimes forcefully, until children can no longer distinguish between truth and propaganda, between wisdom and manipulation. And once those foundations are laid, they are hard to unearth. A belief planted in childhood can become a chain in adulthood, locking entire populations into cycles of limitation they never chose consciously. The awakening begins when we confront this reality without fear. To acknowledge that education is a battlefield is uncomfortable, but it is necessary. It forces us to ask hard questions. Who decides what children learn? Whose values are being passed down? Who benefits from the shaping of their thoughts? These questions are not abstract. They are urgent. Because every day a child spends absorbing unquestioned ideas is another day the world's future is being quietly written by forces we may not see. And yet in this urgency lies an extraordinary truth power is not out of reach. The shaping of tomorrow is not locked away in the hands of the few. It rests in the choices made today, every idea defended, every value protected, every act of courage to challenge harmful ideologies. These become the bricks of a future that is freer, stronger, and more humane. The child who learns to question becomes the adult who refuses to be silenced. The child who is taught to see beyond boundaries becomes the leader who creates new possibilities. This is not idealism. This is the raw mechanics of history. Civilizations rise and fall based not on the weapons they wield, but on the minds they shape. The time for passive acceptance is over. The age where we assume that education would naturally lead to wisdom is gone. If wisdom is not defended, it is replaced. If truth is not fought for, it is buried. And if children are not protected, the future becomes the weapon of those who seek power rather than progress. This is the awakening, the recognition that the shaping of the future does not begin in parliaments, corporations, or battlefields. It begins in the classroom, in the home, in the quiet places where children learn what it means to think, to believe, to become. The awakening is a call to vigilance, a reminder that every generation is entrusted with a duty far greater than itself, the duty to pass forward not only knowledge, but the courage to seek truth. It is here in this very moment that the world must decide. Will the next generation inherit a future of recycled ideologies, blind conformity, and silenced imagination? Or will they inherit the tools to question, to create, to rise beyond the limits imposed upon them? The answer is not predetermined. The answer is being written now. And the pen is in the hands of those who are willing to awaken, to see clearly, and to act decisively. The future is not waiting. It is already unfolding. And the greatest danger is not in what others might do. It is in what we fail to do. If we stay silent, others will shape it. If we refuse responsibility, others will claim it. But if we awaken, if we rise to the challenge, then tomorrow is no longer a question. It is a promise that the power to shape destiny belongs not to those who manipulate. Education has always been spoken of as a gateway, a bridge to opportunity, a path toward a better life. But too often that path is narrowed, restricted, and bound by walls invisible yet suffocating. Education, when stripped to its essence, is not about grades on a paper or the memorization of lifeless facts. It is not about producing uniform minds that fit neatly into the molds designed by systems that thrive on obedience. True education is liberation. It is the training ground where curiosity is sharpened into wisdom, where raw potential is forged into possibility. It is the soil in which the seeds of originality grow, the space where children learn not only how to survive, but how to create, how to question, how to transform the very world they inherit. And yet, what has education become for so many? A series of tests that measure compliance more than creativity. A rigid system that rewards silence over courage, repetition over memorization over imagination. Children are too often told to follow, not to lead, to accept, not to question, to prepare for a life of utility rather than a life of purpose. In this reduction, something sacred is lost. The very essence of learning, the joy of discovery, the thrill of curiosity, the empowerment of self-expression, is stripped away until education becomes a cage rather than a key. But it does not have to be this way. Education, when restored to its true purpose, is not confined to classrooms or textbooks. It extends beyond walls, beyond systems, beyond the limits of tradition. It lives in every conversation that sparks wonder, in every challenge that pushes a mind to think deeper, in every moment where a child dares to ask, why? And is encouraged, not silenced. Education beyond walls is a call to see learning as a way of being, not a task to be completed. It is a recognition that the greatest lessons are not always written. They are lived, observed, and questioned. Consider what happens when education is treated as the training of free thinkers instead of the conditioning of obedient workers. Children learn to see the world not as it is presented to them, but as it truly is. They begin to understand that knowledge is not static but alive, something to be challenged, expanded, and refined. They develop the ability to distinguish between truth and manipulation, between wisdom and propaganda. And with this clarity, they grow not into followers, but into leaders. Not into passive inheritors of ideology, but into active architects of their own vision. The walls of traditional education are not merely physical. They are mental, emotional, ideological. They are built when children are told that failure is shame rather than growth, that questions are disruptions rather than breakthroughs, that conformity is safety rather than limitation. These walls trap not only children, but entire generations in cycles of limitation. Breaking them requires courage. And it requires the recognition that education is not about fitting into a world already built. It is about building a world not yet imagined. When children are allowed to learn beyond walls, they develop resilience, adaptability, and independence. They are no longer dependent on authority for truth because they have learned to seek truth themselves. They no longer cling to one perspective because they have been shown the richness of many. They no longer shrink before challenges because they understand that obstacles are not endpoints but stepping stones. This kind of education does not just prepare children for the world, it equips them to change it. But the responsibility for this transformation cannot rest solely on schools or institutions. It belongs to everyone. It belongs to families who encourage curiosity rather than suppress it. It belongs to communities that reward creativity instead of punishing it. It belongs to individuals who model lifelong learning, showing that education does not end with a diploma, but continues with every book, every conversation, every experience that deepens understanding. Education beyond walls is about reclaiming the sacred act of learning from the hands of those who would confine it. It is about daring to say that a child's worth cannot be measured by a score, that their brilliance cannot be reduced to a statistic, that their potential cannot be confined to the limits of an outdated system. It is about choosing to nurture not just minds that can recite, but minds that can envision. If the world is to change, if humanity is to rise above the cycles of ignorance and conformity that have held it hostage, then education must be liberated. It must be seen not as a system, but as a force, one that empowers, uplifts, and transforms. The child who learns beyond walls does not simply carry knowledge, they carry freedom. They carry the courage to ask the questions others fear. They carry the strength to challenge what others accept. And in their hands, the world begins to change. This is the power of education when it is unchained. This is the promise of learning when it is allowed to breathe. Beyond walls, beyond conformity, beyond fear, education becomes not just preparation for life, but life itself. And when children learn in this way, they do not simply grow into adults. They grow into forces of transformation, capable of shaping a future that no wall could ever contain. Ideology is everywhere. It does not always arrive with banners or proclamations. It does not always shout loudly or declare its presence openly. More often, it slips silently into the corners of daily life, disguised as common sense, tradition, or unquestionable truth. And nowhere does its influence run deeper than in the minds of children. For it is in childhood, when minds are most open, most impressionable, that ideology finds fertile ground. Once planted, it grows roots so deep that entire generations can live their lives believing they are free, when in truth they're only repeating ideas that were handed to them before they had the chance to choose. The danger of ideology is not that it exists, because belief, vision, and philosophy will always exist. It is that ideology can dominate without being noticed. Because a child who grows up with unquestioned beliefs does not see them as choices, but as reality itself. And when that happens, the ability to think critically, to challenge, to question is stripped away before it even has the chance to form. Ideology becomes a silent architect of the future, building not with brick and stone, but with thoughts, values, and loyalties that are rarely examined. This grip is powerful because it is invisible. It convinces children that their worldview is natural, inevitable, and absolute. It tells them what to fear, who to trust, what to admire, and what to reject, often without them ever realizing they have accepted someone else's design for their lives. By the time they grow, the foundations are set, and entire societies become reflections not of free will, but of indoctrination disguised as education, tradition, or even morality. But here lies the truth: ideology is never neutral. Every system, every institution, every lesson carries within it a vision of the world it seeks to create. Some ideologies liberate, others imprison. Some inspire the best in humanity, others exploit its fears and weaknesses. And when ideology grips the young, the trajectory of the future bends in its direction. This is why awareness is not optional. This is why vigilance is necessary. For if ideology goes unchallenged, it does not merely influence, it defines. Think of how civilizations rise and fall. Rarely is their downfall caused by external force alone. More often, it comes from within. When rigid ideologies blind people to truth, when unquestioned doctrines prevent progress, when loyalty to dogma outweighs loyalty to humanity, History is filled with moments where generations were swept into wars, divisions, and oppression, not because they chose freely, but because they inherited ideas that told them such destruction was righteous or inevitable. And all of it begins in childhood, when young minds are shaped not to ask, is this true? But to assume this must be true. The grip of ideology is strong, but it is not unbreakable. What breaks it is not rebellion without purpose, but awareness sharpened into clarity. When children are taught to see that every idea has a source, every belief has a motive, every system has a design, they become capable of stepping outside the invisible walls that ideology builds around them. They learn to ask, who benefits from this belief? Who suffers because of it? What truths might be hidden behind the story I am told? These questions do not destroy ideology, they expose it. They reveal its shape, its power, its purpose. And once revealed, ideology loses its ability to control silently. But let us not underestimate the resistance to such awakening. Those who profit from control fear the power of questioning. They fear children who grow into adults to accept the limits imposed upon them. They fear the minds that refuse to bow to inherited dogma. And so every system of indoctrination fights back, seeking to silence curiosity, to punish dissent, to label questioning as danger. Yet history proves this again and again. The more fiercely curiosity is suppressed, the more powerful it becomes when it finally breaks free. To guard children against the grip of ideology does not mean shielding them from ideas. On the contrary, it means exposing them to many so they learn to compare, to analyze, to see with their own eyes. It means teaching them that no idea is sacred beyond examination, no tradition beyond scrutiny, no belief beyond questioning. This does not strip them of meaning. It gives them the power to choose meaning for themselves. The grip of ideology is heavy, but children were shown the tools of awareness do not remain captives. They grow into adults who no longer confuse inherited thought with universal truth. They build societies where diversity of perspective is not feared but celebrated. They replace blind allegiance with conscious conviction. And in doing so, they loosen the chains that have bound humanity for generations. The truth is simple, Z. Ideology will always exist. The question is not whether children will be influenced, but whether they will be equipped to see that influence clearly. The question is not whether they will inherit beliefs, but whether they will have the courage and clarity to examine them. When ideology grips unchallenged, it breeds stagnation. When it is revealed, it becomes a tool to be used, rather than a prison to be endured. This is the responsibility before us. To recognize that the shaping of young minds is not a passive act, it is the most decisive battleground of all. And unless we guard against the silent grip of ideology, the future will not be chosen. It will be dictated. But if children are armed with awareness, if they are taught to question, then the grip loosens and the future becomes theirs to claim. When we look into the eyes of a child, we are not simply seeing who they are in this moment. We are looking at the reflection of tomorrow. Within every child lies the unspoken promise of what humanity can become. Their minds still unshaped hold the blueprints of the future. Their beliefs still forming will one day drive decisions that ripple across societies. Their imagination still unbound will either be nourished into brilliance or suffocated into silence. A child is not just an individual growing into adulthood. A child is a vessel carrying forward the weight, the lessons, the values, and the failures of generations. The question is not whether they will mirror us, but what part of us they will mirror. The truth is simple. Children do not create the future in isolation. They absorb it from the world around them. They mirror the courage or the fear they see, the vision or the blindness they inherit, the strength or the weakness we pass down. And what they inherit is not always intentional. It flows in the way we speak, the choices we make, the systems we accept, and the ideologies we allow to seep into their lives. Neglect their minds and the future is neglected. Fill them with fear, and the future will be ruled by fear. But nurture their strength, their clarity, their courage, and the future becomes a place where possibility is not an exception, but the norm. A child does not simply mimic the actions of those around them. They internalize the unspoken values of the society they are born into. When children grow in environments where questioning is silenced, they become adults who silence themselves. When they grow in systems where conformity is rewarded, they become adults who enforce conformity. But when they grow in spaces where curiosity is protected, when their courage is affirmed, when their individuality is honored, they become adults who not only carry freedom, but expand it. The mirror of tomorrow reflects not the dreams we speak, but the truths we live. This reality should stir urgency within us, because the future is not some abstract destination decades away. It is already forming in the minds of children sitting in classrooms, walking through communities, watching how adults treat one another. Their mirror is always on, always recording. And what it reflects back to the world years later will not be what we hoped, but what we allowed. Think about this. A single generation raised in fear can create decades of stagnation. A single generation raised in blind obedience can give rise to entire societies unable to think for themselves. And yet the reverse is just as true. A single generation raised to think critically can dismantle systems of oppression. A single generation raised to value creativity can redefine progress. A single generation raised with courage can set history on fire and light the path for all who follow. Children are not powerless. They are the most powerful force we have because they are the carriers of continuity. They take what we give them and amplify it. They take our strengths and magnify them, but they also take our weaknesses and carry them forward. Every act of silence, every ignored injustice, every unquestioned ideology does not end with us. it multiplies in them. And when multiplied in millions of children across the world, it shapes the very structure of tomorrow. The responsibility here is immense, but it is also liberating because it means that the choices we make today ripple forward into eternity. It means that every act of courage shown before a child, every defense of truth, every spark of creativity we nurture in them becomes more than a moment. It becomes a legacy. Children will mirror not the world we wish existed, but the world we create in front of them. If they see resilience, they will mirror resilience. If they see compassion, they will mirror compassion. If they see a refusal to bow to oppression, they will mirror that same defiance in the years to come. The child as the mirror of tomorrow is both a warning and a promise. A warning that we cannot neglect them without neglecting the future itself. A promise that if we rise to the responsibility of guiding them with clarity and courage, then the world that follows us can rise higher than the world we inherited. What we teach children, whether through words, through systems, or through example, becomes the architecture of their adulthood. And in their adulthood lies the architecture of the world. To look into the eyes of a child is to look into time itself. It is to see the reflection of choices not yet made, possibilities not yet realized, futures not yet written. But make no mistake, those futures are not waiting idly. They are forming in real time. Every day, every influence, every act of teaching or neglect chisels away at the shape of tomorrow. The mirror is already recording. This truth demands more than awareness. It demands action. For if we fail to honor the mirror, it will reflect back not only our strengths, but our failures, not only our wisdom, but our complacency. But if we honor it, if we protect it, if we shape it with vision, courage, and love for truth, then the reflection of tomorrow will not be a copy of our limitations. It will be the proof that we chose to rise above them. Cycles repeat themselves when no one dares to interrupt them. The cycle of ignorance, the cycle of silence, because cycle of blind obedience, these patterns do not end because time passes. They end because someone has the courage to break them. And yet, generation after generation, how many have lived repeating the same limitations of those before them? How many have accepted broken systems as permanent, destructive ideologies as normal, and inherited weaknesses as destiny? The chains of repetition are strong, but they are not unbreakable. They only endure because too few have chosen to rise and shatter them. Breaking the cycle requires more than dissatisfaction. Complaining about what is wrong is easy. Criticizing from the sidelines is comfortable. But cycles are not undone by words alone. They are undone by vision, courage, and sacrifice. They are undone when individuals choose to stand against what is easy in order to fight for what is necessary. To break the cycle is to declare that what has been passed down does not have to be passed on, that the inheritance of limitation ends here, now, with us. Consider how cycles form. A child is silenced, and they grow into an adult who silences others. A community is told to obey, and it becomes a society that enforces obedience. A generation grows up believing truth is dangerous, and the next inherits a world where lies rule freely. Cycles survive because they disguise themselves as normality. People learn to stop questioning them, to live inside them as though there is no alternative. But history proves there is always an alternative. Every breakthrough humanity has ever achieved came because someone dared to say, this is not enough. Breaking the cycle demands vision. Without vision, there is only repetition. Vision is the ability to see beyond the present moment, beyond the weight of tradition, beyond the fear of opposition. Vision does not ignore reality. It confronts it with the determination to create something better. It says, I see what is, but I will fight for what could be. And when vision is combined with courage, cycles begin to fracture. But courage alone is not enough. Breaking the cycle requires endurance because resistance will always meet change. Systems that thrive on conformity will fight to preserve themselves. Ideologies that profit from obedience will resist being questioned. Those who benefit from cycles will do everything they can to keep them alive. That is why so many hesitate to act, because the cost of defiance is real. But the cost of silence is far greater. To stay silent is to allow cycles of limitation to continue unchallenged, shaping not only our lives, but the lives of children yet to be born. Every cycle broken has a ripple effect. When one person refuses to bow to fear, others learn that fear is not invincible. When one community rises against oppression, others see that change is possible. When one generation chooses truth over lies, the generations that follow inherit a foundation of clarity rather than confusion. This is how history turns. Not by chance, not by accident, but by the choice of those who dare disrupt the repetition. Do not underestimate the power of a single act of defiance. The chains of cycles are heavy, but they begin to crack the moment someone decides they will no longer carry them. One spark is enough to ignite an entire blaze. One voice is enough to shatter the silence. One act of courage is enough to inspire thousands more. The strength to break cycles has never rested with the majority. It has always rested with the few who were brave enough to lead when others were too afraid to move. Breaking the cycle is not only an act of rebellion, it is an act of love. Love for the children who deserve a future unbound by the mistakes of the past. Love for truth, for freedom, for the possibility of a world that does not repeat the same chains of conformity. To break the cycle is to refuse to hand down fear as an inheritance, to refuse to let ignorance masquerade as tradition, to refuse to allow ideology to dictate destiny. It is to say the cycle ends here. Every generation is faced with a choice. Repeat or redefine. Those who choose to repeat become prisoners of history. Those who choose to redefine become the architects of tomorrow. And the choice is not made in grand speeches or distant moments. It is made now in the decisions we make, in the courage we summon, in the responsibility we accept. The question is no longer whether cycles exist, they do. The question is whether we will have the courage to break them. Will we pass down fear or will we pass down freedom? Will we repeat silence or will we amplify truth? Will we mirror the chains of the past or will we forge a future unshackled? The answer is not written yet. It will be written in what we choose to do now. The cycles can end, but only if we decide to be the ones who break them. The time for waiting has ended. The luxury of passivity is gone. The world is not slowly shaping itself into a better future. It is being shaped actively, deliberately. And every second we delay, every moment we hesitate, someone else steps forward to decide what tomorrow will look like. The future is not neutral. It is not patient. It is demanding. Demanding courage, demanding clarity, demanding action from those who refuse to let history be written without their hand upon it. Children will inherit the world we leave behind, but more than that, they will inherit the world we choose to shape in front of them. If they see resignation, they will inherit resignation. If they see fear, they will inherit fear. But if they see courage, if they see resilience, if they see an unshakable commitment to truth,